Joe Rogan sits in his Austin studio, January 2025, showing Mel Gibson graph on his phone, pointing at what he claims is proof that climate change is a hoax, when 11.5 million people watch him completely misread a scientific study in real time. Not sort of misread, not partially misunderstand, completely, catastrophically, almost impressively wrong about data he's looking directly at. And the scientist who created that graph? Jessica Tierney watches from Arizona, shaking her head, calling his interpretation dumb, and begging him to invite her on the show instead of continuing to spread misinformation to tens of millions of listeners who trust him more than they trust actual climate scientists. Austin, Texas, January 2025. The Joe Rogan Experience Studio. Mel Gibson sits across from Rogan, days before his Los Angeles mansion burns to ground in the Palisades fires, one of the most destructive blazes in L.A. history, worsened by climate change, according to scientists. The irony will be devastating later. But right now, Gibson and Rogan are discussing climate science. Neither of them qualified, both of them confident. Rogan pulls up a graph on his phone. Washington Post article. Temperature reconstruction, over 485 million years. Beautiful data visualization showing how Earth's climate has changed over geological time. Massive temperature swings, ice ages, hothouse periods, the entire thermal history of our planet compressed into one chart. Look at this, Rogan says, showing Gibson. There's a lot of horseshit involved in climate change. I've studied that. He points at the graph. The temperature on Earth is plummeting. Look at the drop at the end. That's where we are. That's the reality. Gibson nods, agrees. Neither of them understand what they're looking at. Neither of them realize they're reading a timescale that spans millions of years, like it's a weather forecast. Neither of them grasp that the drop Rogan sees is actually unprecedented rapid warming happening faster than anything in 500 million years of Earth history. The clip goes viral. Not because it's shocking that Joe Rogan misunderstands climate science. That's expected. But because the level of misinterpretation is almost impressive. Watching him be so completely wrong about data he's holding in his hand, about research he claims to have studied, about a graph created by scientists who are now publicly calling him out. Jessica Tierney watches the clip from her office at the University of Arizona. She's a paleoclimatologist. She co-authored the study that produced that graph. Spent 2 years compiling 150,000 data points from fossil records and climate models. Created what the Washington Post called the most rigorous reconstruction of Earth's past temperatures ever produced. And now Joe Rogan is using her work to claim the exact opposite of what it actually shows. It's dumb the way he's interpreting this graph, Tierney tells The Guardian when they ask her about Rogan's claims. And if he wants to talk about it, he should invite me onto the show instead of talking about it to Mel Gibson or Bernie Sanders. Because this isn't the first time. Rogan has referenced the same graph in at least 6 different episodes. Mel Gibson in January, Bernie Sanders in June, J.D. Vance during the election, Jimmy Corsetti, multiple guests, same graph, same completely wrong interpretation every single time. I've watched his clips and gone, oh geez, Tierney says. I can only laugh sometimes. But it is a bummer that these podcasts with large audiences are spewing this old-school denier nonsense. It's not helpful. Here's what the graph actually shows. Earth's temperature has fluctuated dramatically over 485 million years. There have been periods much hotter than today. The Permian period 250 million years ago saw a temperature spike by 10 degrees Celsius in what's called the Great Dying, the largest mass extinction event in Earth's history. Over 90% of all species died. Acid rain, boiling oceans, catastrophic climate change that fundamentally reshaped life on this planet. But here's the critical part Rogan completely misses. That 10-degree spike took 50,000 years. 50,000 years of gradual warming. Life had time to adapt, migrate, evolve. Not all of it survived, obviously, but the timescale allowed for some adaptation. Current warming? 1.2 degrees Celsius in 150 years. Since the Industrial Revolution. Since humans started burning fossil fuels at scale. That's not a gradual shift measured in millennia. That's a catastrophic spike measured in decades. The rate of change is unprecedented in Earth's entire recorded history. It's all about the speed, Tierney explains. We've never seen carbon dioxide and temperature rise as fast as now. Even in big extinction events, it was slower than this. We evolved in a cooler climate, and now we are rapidly warming it up and putting life on this planet in danger. It's scary. Daniel Lunt, another co-author of the study, reinforces this point. The warming and cooling cycles Rogan references happened so slowly that they're essentially undetectable on the timescale of a human lifetime. You couldn't observe them, couldn't feel them. They happened over geological epochs, not human generations. But current warming, observable in real time, measurable year over year, undeniable to anyone paying attention, except Rogan isn't paying attention. Or more accurately, he's seeing what he wants to see, looking at a graph that spans 485 million years, and reading the timescale like it's showing recent decades, pointing at fluctuations that occurred over millions of years, and claiming they prove Earth is currently cooling. It's like looking at a map of North America and claiming Texas is underwater because the Gulf of Mexico appears on the chart. Raleigh Williams, climate science expert who hosts YouTube show Climate Town, watches Rogan's clips and can barely believe what he's seeing. It's almost impressive how incorrect he's able to be about an article he's looking directly at, Williams says. It's also an incredible example of how climate misinformation sneaks into extremely popular media and then gets absorbed into the brains of millions of Americans. And that's the real problem. Not that Joe Rogan misunderstands science. Lots of people misunderstand science. But Joe Rogan has 20 million YouTube subscribers, 14.5 million Spotify followers, 19.9 million Instagram followers. The Joe Rogan Experience is consistently the most popular podcast in America. When he says something, millions of people hear it. Trust it. Repeat it. Believe it more than they believe actual scientists explaining actual data. Yale Climate Connections did a study, found that nearly 40% of adults under 30 get their news from social media influencers like Rogan, not from newspapers, not from scientific journals, from podcasters and YouTubers and streamers who have massive audiences but no expertise. And 8 of the 10 most popular online shows in America spread false or misleading information about climate change. 8 out of 10. Rogan's one of them. The frustrating part for scientists like Tierney is watching their work get twisted. They spent years creating this temperature reconstruction specifically to understand Earth's climate history, to provide context for current warming, to show how unprecedented our current situation is. And instead of that context informing people about the urgency of climate action, it's being weaponized to deny climate change exists. Joe is speaking to his audience, and they want it to be entertaining. I get it. Tierney says, showing remarkable patience for someone whose life's work is being publicly misrepresented. But it concerns me because he isn't given the right message. She's offered to appear on the show multiple times, publicly challenged Rogan to invite her on instead of discussing her research with actors and politicians who don't understand paleoclimatology. I think it's safe to say Mel Gibson doesn't know a whole lot about paleoclimate, she points out. But Rogan hasn't responded, hasn't invited her, keeps referencing the same graph in the same incorrect way to different guests who nod along because they don't know any better either. And it's not just ignorance. Rogan frames his climate denial as brave truth-telling, acts like he studied the data, discovered something scientists don't want you to know, found the inconvenient truth they're trying to hide. Essentially, they found that we're in a cooling period, he tells one guest. This was like a very inconvenient discovery, but they had to report the data. And kudos to them for doing that. Kudos for reporting data that shows the opposite of what Rogan claims it shows. The scientists aren't hiding inconvenient truths. They're publicly explaining what their research actually means while Rogan ignores them and keeps spreading misinformation. David Arkush, director of the climate program at Public Citizen, addresses another common Rogan talking point in a YouTube video. Rogan frequently claims climate change is a financial scam, that green energy corporations and climate scientists are profiting from climate alarmism. Arkush does the math. The global investment in climate action equals what one major oil company, ExxonMobil, makes in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. So if you want to talk about who's got the most money in the game and the most financial interests to protect, Arkush says It's obviously big oil. But Rogan's audience doesn't hear that. They hear Rogan, who they trust, telling them climate change is horseshit, that scientists are lying, that the data proves Earth is cooling, not warming. And they believe him because he sounds confident, because he references studies, because he frames himself as the independent truth teller standing up to institutional narratives. Edward Maybach, climate communication specialist at George Mason University, explains the fundamental problem. Ordinary folks don't learn about climate change by reading science journals. They learn from people they trust, from media they consume, from influencers who speak their language. And if those influencers are spreading misinformation, intentionally or through genuine misunderstanding, millions of people end up with completely wrong information about one of the most important issues facing humanity. The stakes couldn't be higher. Global temperatures have risen 1.2 degrees Celsius since pre-industrial times. That might not sound like much, but it's causing measurable impacts. More intense hurricanes, longer droughts, devastating wildfires like the one that burned Mel Gibson's mansion while he was recording with Rogan, rising sea levels, species extinctions, crop failures, mass migration. The effects are here now, observable, documented, undeniable to anyone looking at the evidence honestly. But Rogan looks at a graph spanning 485 million years and sees evidence that climate change is fake, sees a drop at the end that doesn't exist, misreads a timescale so completely that he thinks fluctuations occurring over epochs prove something about recent decades. And millions of his listeners trust him more than they trust the scientists who actually created the data. We're changing Earth's temperature at a rate that exceeds anything we know about. Tierney warns. The current rate of warming is faster than the asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs, faster than the volcanic eruptions that caused the Great Dying, faster than anything in Earth's geological record. And we're doing it deliberately, knowingly, while people like Rogan tell millions of listeners not to worry about it. The scientific consensus is overwhelming. NASA, NOAA, the UN, every major scientific organization in the world agrees. Climate change is real. It's caused by human activity. It's happening faster than predicted, and it's going to get worse unless we take dramatic action soon. But consensus doesn't matter when influential voices spread misinformation. When Joe Rogan tells his audience climate change is horseshit, that matters more to millions of people than what scientists say. When he misreads a graph and claims it shows Earth is cooling, his listeners believe it despite all evidence to the contrary. This isn't just about one podcast host getting one thing wrong. It's about the broader crisis of scientific communication in an age where influence matters more than expertise, where confidence matters more than accuracy, where millions of people trust entertainers more than researchers. Tierney still hopes Rogan will invite her on the show. Let her explain what the data actually shows. Give his audience accurate information instead of dangerous misinformation. She's willing to do it, ready to help, but the invitation hasn't come. So the misinformation continues, episode after episode, graph after graph. Millions of viewers watching Joe Rogan look directly at scientific data and interpret in a way so wrong that the scientists who created it are publicly calling him out, begging him to stop, offering to explain what he's missing. But Rogan doesn't stop, because in his world, the graph proves what he wanted to prove. The data confirms what he already believed. The scientists warning about catastrophic warming are either wrong or lying, and he's a brave truth teller showing his audience what the establishment doesn't want them to know. And here's the deeper tragedy. Rogan genuinely believes he's studied this, genuinely thinks he understands the data better than the scientists who created it. That's not cynical manipulation. That's Dunning-Kruger effect. Confidence without competence. The inability to recognize the limits of your understanding. When Tierney says it's dumb, she's being accurate. It is objectively, demonstrably wrong. And the wrongness isn't subtle. It's fundamental misunderstanding of timescale and rate of change. But Rogan's audience doesn't know that. They hear him reference a study published in Science. They see a graph from the Washington Post. They assume he understands it. Why wouldn't they? He sounds confident. He presents himself as someone who's done research, and his brand is built on questioning mainstream narratives. So when he says climate scientists are wrong, his audience believes him. When he claims Earth is cooling, they repeat it. When he frames climate action as a scam, they oppose it. And the cycle of misinformation continues, amplified by one of the most powerful media platforms in America. Meanwhile, the planet keeps warming, faster than it ever has, faster than most species can adapt, faster than we predicted, and millions of people who could be demanding action, who could be voting for a climate policy, who could be part of the solution, instead believe climate change is a hoax because Joe Rogan misread a graph and told them so. The invitation to Tierney remains open. The scientists remain willing to explain. The data remains clear. But the misinformation spreads faster than the truth ever could. And in a world where influence matters more than expertise, that might be the most frightening temperature spike of all.